Buried alive beneath two burning suns, a fallen alien noble clings to life in a merciless desert, until a lone human stumbles upon her and changes everything. What begins as a rescue becomes a mission that will test courage, loyalty, and the power of unexpected bonds. This is a story of survival, betrayal, and hope rising from the ashes of war. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and show your support with a big thumbs up by liking the video. Now, let's jump into the story. The twin suns of Virel burned high above the dunes, casting long waves of shimmering heat across the endless golden desert. The sand shifted lazily in the wind, whispering secrets only the sky could hear. Beneath that cruel sun, Nalia remained, still, her body buried up to her neck in the scorching sand. Her once gleaming robe, a symbol of her noble status among the Valari, now hung in faded strips across her shoulders. Her pale violet skin was cracked and dry, lips blistered from the heat. Only her silver eyes moved, blinking slowly against the sting of the sun and wind. She had stopped screaming days ago. No one had answered. No one was coming. The rebels who had once knelt before her family had turned on them, calling her a traitor to a future she never agreed to. They hadn't bothered to execute her with dignity. Instead, they sentenced her to the sand, slow, lonely, and cruel. Breath came in shallow gasps. The air was dry as ash. Her thoughts wandered now, drifting between dreams and fading memories. She saw her younger brother, Keem, laughing in the garden under blue moons, chasing lights with a wooden sword. Then she saw his face streaked with fear as soldiers dragged him away. That was the last time she saw him. She didn't know if he was alive. She didn't know if she would ever see another face again. Her throat burned. She tried to whisper his name, but only a soft exhale came out. She was ready to let go. The wind picked up, swirling sand around her face. She closed her eyes and surrendered to the silence. A sound broke the stillness, a strange, uneven crunch in the sand. Footsteps. Real ones. Her eyes snapped open, squinting against the sun. At first, she thought it was a mirage, another cruel trick of the heat. But the figure became clearer with each step. It was tall, two-legged, wrapped in mismatched cloth and armor. A mask hung loosely around his neck. Not Valeri. Definitely not. He stopped a few feet from her, eyes wide, staring down with a mix of shock and confusion. "Whoa," he breathed, his voice rough. "You're alive?" Nalia blinked. Her lips barely moved. "Not for long." The man dropped to his knees beside her, panting. His skin was tanned from too many days under the suns, his dark hair messy and full of dust. He tossed his gear to the side and began scraping at the sand with his bare hands. "Don't move," he said quickly. Nalia almost laughed. The sound would have hurt too much. His digging was frantic, clumsy, desperate. Sand flew in all directions as he fought to free her shoulders. Nalia could only watch. She couldn't understand why. Why was this human helping her? He had no reason to. "Why?" she whispered hoarsely. "Why are you helping me?" He paused just long enough to look her in the eye. "Because you're a person," he said. "And no one deserves to die like this." Her chest ached, not from injury, but from the kindness in his words. No one had spoken to her like that in so long. She looked away, too tired to cry. He returned to digging. When he had cleared enough space around her chest, he pulled a canteen from his satchel. "Small sips," he said, gently pressing the mouth to her lips. The water was cool, and when it touched her tongue, it burned, then healed. She coughed, then swallowed. Her hands trembled as feeling began to return. "I'm Joran," he said. "Explorer, salvager, and occasional idiot. You got a name?" "Nalia," she whispered. Of Valeri. He nodded. Okay, Nalia, let's get you out of this nightmare. It took nearly an hour before she could move even slightly. Joran was patient, never complaining despite the heat or his bruised knees. When she was loose enough, he slipped his arms under her and lifted her out. Like a child. She was weightless in his grip, weakened from days of torture. He carried her over the dunes, his breath labored but steady. Finally, they reached a shaded spot beneath a half-buried pod. He had made a small shelter from scrap metal and cloth, barely big enough for one person. He set her down gently on a padded mat, then sat nearby, rubbing his shoulders and reaching for more water. As Nalia drifted into sleep, she stared at the stranger beside her, the one who had stopped in a desert full of silence. She didn't know him. He didn't know her, but he had saved her. That was something. Maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. Asterisk, the night air was cold, a sharp contrast to the brutal heat of the day. The stars above were brighter than anything Joran had ever seen on Earth, scattered across the sky like scattered memories. Inside the small shelter he had built, the fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows against the walls. Nalia lay, still on the mat, wrapped in a thin blanket, her breathing slow but stronger than it had been earlier. Her skin was no longer as pale, and her hands no longer trembled. She stirred, eyes fluttering open to the sound of someone humming. Joran sat beside the fire, stirring something in a metal pot. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing arms marked by old scars and sunburn. He looked over and gave her a crooked smile. You're awake. That's good. You scared me for a bit there. Nalia tried to sit up, but her muscles resisted. She winced and leaned back against the mat. You stayed? She whispered, almost surprised. Of course I did, Joran said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You think I'd just dig you out of the sand and then leave you here to freeze? She didn't know what to say. Gratitude was a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time, and it sat strangely in her chest. He ladled some of the food into a small bowl and brought it over, kneeling beside her. It's not gourmet, he said, but it's warm. Try a little. She tasted it, swallowing slowly. It was simple, a stew of dried protein and grain, but it filled her stomach and lit a small spark of life inside her. Thank you, she murmured. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the wind outside and the fire's gentle crackle. Finally, Nalia spoke. I thought your kind didn't care for mine. Joran raised an eyebrow. My kind? Humans. You mean? She nodded weakly. He shrugged. People are people. Some are awful. Some aren't. I've met a few Valeri before. One shot at me. One fixed my ship. And now there's you. I don't judge a whole species by a few bad conversations. Nalia studied him carefully. He was nothing like the humans described in rebel speeches, cold, greedy, always conquering. He seemed too tired to hate, too worn to carry pride. You're strange, she said softly. He chuckled. I get that a lot. Then her gaze lowered, and the shadows around her eyes deepened. They took my brother, Keem, when they buried me. They took him. I don't know if he's still alive. Joran's expression changed. He didn't speak right away. He set down the bowl and leaned back, staring at the roof of the shelter. I've seen that kind of cruelty, he said. After a moment, not just here, on other planets too. Governments fall, power shifts, and the first thing they take is the innocent. Nalia's fingers curled weakly into the blanket. I couldn't protect him. I was supposed to. I was next in line to lead, but I wanted peace. I refused to fight. That made me dangerous. Joran turned his head toward her. It made you brave. She looked at him, unsure how to respond. No one had ever said that before. Her people had called her a coward. The rebels had called her a traitor. But this human, he saw something else. "You think he's still alive?" Joran asked. "I don't know," she said. I feel it, like he's waiting." Joran stood up, stretching his sore arms. "Then we go find him." Nalia blinked. "What?" "You heard me," he said with a half-smile. "If he's out there, we'll find him." "But why would you?" "Help? You don't even know me." Joran's smile faded slightly, but the kindness didn't leave his eyes. "You didn't deserve to be buried alive. That's enough for me." He began sorting through supplies, checking his maps, and adjusting the power cells on his hovercart. Nalia watched him for a long moment, unsure if he was mad, kind, or both. She forced herself to sit up more, despite the pain. "There's a prison camp," she said, "north of here, hidden in the cliffs. They call it the Hollow Nest. If he's alive, that's where they'd keep him." "Then that's where we're headed," Joran said, already packing. As the fire burned low and the stars shifted, Nalia felt something stir inside her. It wasn't just hope. It was something deeper. Something she thought she'd buried in the sand with the rest of her past. She had been ready to die. But Joran had pulled her back. Now he was ready to risk everything for her. A stranger, a former enemy. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long while, she wanted to see it. The desert stretched endlessly before them. But Nalia and Joran pressed on. The hovercart they rode hummed low across the sand, its rusted frame groaning with every bump. The sky above had turned a dull orange as storm clouds formed on the horizon. It would not be long before the sandstorms arrived again, but they had no time to wait. The cliffs where the Hollow Nest prison was hidden were just a few hours ahead, and every moment counted. Joran drove in silence, eyes sharp beneath his cracked goggles. Nalia sat beside him, a map spread across her lap, her fingers tracing the old rebel trails. As the wind picked up, Nalia pulled her hood tighter. Her strength had returned slowly over the past few days, thanks to Joran's help. Her legs still ached, and her shoulders bore the scars of sun and sand, but her focus had sharpened. Each hour they traveled, her thoughts turned more and more to her brother. She pictured him locked in a dark cell, cold and alone, wondering if anyone even remembered him. By the time they reached the cliffs, the storm had reached their backs. Black clouds rolled across the desert behind them, chasing them like a beast. The Hollow Nest was built into the cliffs themselves, black stone carved by hand and war, hidden behind layers of camouflage, and guarded by tall watchtowers. Joran landed the cart behind a rocky ridge and crouched low with his binoculars. "Looks quiet," he muttered. "Too quiet." "There are sensors," Nalia replied. "The rebels wired the entire cliffside. But I still have access codes. My bloodline gives me clearance at least. It used to." Joran looked at her, and she didn't have to explain. If it didn't work, they'd be dead before they stepped inside. He nodded once, then handed her a small device from his pouch. "You handle the doors. I'll handle the noise." They moved quickly, slipping from rock to rock, until they reached a hidden entrance carved behind a narrow waterfall. Nalia pressed her hand to the panel, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Then the light blinked green. The door opened. Inside, the air was cold and stale. The halls were lit by weak red lights, casting eerie shadows across the stone walls. They crept forward, passing cells filled with quiet figures, prisoners huddled in corners, too weak to lift their heads. Nalia's heart sank. How many had been forgotten in this place? They searched silently, listening for footsteps. Finally, in a dim cell near the lower wing, Nalia stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. There, curled on the floor, was a young Valeri boy with silver hair and bruises along his arms. He looked up, confused by the sound. When their eyes met, his expression changed from fear to shock. "Keem," she whispered. The boy blinked slowly, then reached out with a trembling hand. "Nalia?" She dropped to her knees and pulled him into her arms. His body was small and too thin, but he was alive. She held him tightly, her chest aching with relief. Jore, and stood by the door, watching the reunion with guarded eyes. "We've got to move," he said. "Fast." They had almost reached the exit when a loud alarm blared. Red lights began flashing. Doors slammed shut across the compound. Joran cursed under his breath. So much for quiet. From the far end of the hallway, heavy footsteps echoed. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, armor-clad and dangerous. Commander Rosen. His face was partly hidden behind a cracked visor, but his voice was as sharp as ever. "Well, look who didn't stay buried," Rosen growled. Nalia stood between him and her brother, fury in her eyes. "You left me to die. And yet, here, you are," he sneered. "Should have made sure you are deeper in the sand." Joran stepped forward, raising his plasma pistol. "You'll want to move," he said coldly. Rosen didn't even blink. He activated his armor's shield and drew a long weapon from his back. "You brought a human?" How fitting. Before another word could be said, the hallway exploded into violence. Joran fired, forcing Rosen back. Nalia pulled Keem behind the wall and reached for a control panel, overriding the door locks. Sparks flew as Joran rolled across the floor, barely dodging a shot. Rosen moved with brutal force, breaking panels and shoving walls aside. Nalia found an old disruptor in a side case and activated it. As Rosen lifted his arm to strike, she hit him with the pulse. His armor locked up, joints freezing, power systems glitching. Joran didn't hesitate. He fired once more, clean and direct. The commander collapsed with a loud crash, his weapon skidding across the floor. He ran to Joran, Keem right behind her. Joran looked shaken, but nodded. "I'm good. Let's go." They raced back through the compound as smoke rose from broken circuits. As they climbed aboard the hover cart and shot into the desert, the hollow nest burned behind them. The storm swallowed the prison whole, leaving nothing but ash and steel behind. Nalia held her brother tightly as the wind howled around them. He was safe. For now, that was enough. The sky above the desert was no longer orange, but deep black, dotted with stars that shimmered like distant lanterns. The storm had passed, leaving behind broken sand dunes and scorched stone. The hover cart moved slowly now, its engine coughing with each mile. Joran sat at the controls, eyes half shut. From exhaustion, one arm wrapped in a rough bandage where Rosen's blade had grazed him. Behind him, Nalia held her brother close. Keem had fallen asleep in her lap, safe for the first time in months. His breathing was calm, his fingers curled lightly around hers, as if afraid she might disappear. They had done it. Against every odd, they had broken into a fortress, escaped a storm, and survived a battle. But now came the part that was harder to explain. What next? Nalia looked out over the dunes, watching as the last embers of the rebel prison faded into the horizon. Smoke rose in distant lines, carried gently by the wind. There was no turning back. Even if they wanted to, the world they had left behind was gone. They made camp in a canyon that night, tucked away from the open desert. Joran set up a signal beacon beside a large rock, tapping into the last of his power cells. The shelter they built was simple, just enough to block the wind. Nalia gathered small sticks and started a fire. The flames danced quietly as the air grew colder. Joren sat beside her, cradling a metal mug of water between his palms. His face was tired, streaked with dirt and blood, But he was still smiling. "We're alive," he said, almost in disbelief. Nalia nodded. "We are." He looked toward the sleeping boy. "He's strong." "He had to be," she whispered. They took everything from him, and he still held on. "You both did," Joran said. Nalia, why? Stared into the fire. Her heart felt heavy, not with sadness, but with the weight of possibility. She had been raised to lead, trained to fight, then cast aside when she chose peace instead of violence. Now the thought of returning to that life felt distant, even wrong. "There's no throne to return to," she said quietly. "The Valeri Council is broken. My family is gone. The people I knew, they've either betrayed me or vanished." Joran sipped his water, not interrupting. He knew what silence meant in a moment like this. After a while, he asked, "So what do you want to do?" She didn't answer right away. She looked at him, this human who had risked everything for someone he barely knew. He had no crown, no power, no reason to help. But he had helped anyway. "I don't know," she admitted. "But maybe we build something new. Not a throne, a home. A place that isn't about bloodlines or orders." Joran nodded slowly. "I've been wandering a long time. Never thought I'd stop anywhere. But I'm not against the idea of stopping. At least for a while." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the weight of everything they had survived seemed to lift. There was peace in the quiet, in the flickering of the fire and the steady rhythm of Keen's breathing. By morning, they had packed what little they had and loaded it into Joran's ship, the Finklight. It wasn't pretty. The paint had peeled, some panels were dented, and the floor creaked in the back. But it flew, and that was enough. Nalia helped Keen into a bunk and buckled him in, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. The boy smiled. In his sleep, his dreams no longer haunted by cell walls and cold stone. Joran powered up the engines, flipping switches and watching lights flicker to life. The ship rumbled beneath their feet. Eager to rise, Nalia stood beside him in the cockpit, arms crossed loosely over her chest. "You're sure this thing will hold together?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Joren smirked. "She always does." Barely. As the ship rose into the sky, the desert below shrank away. The cliffs, the wreckage, the trails of smoke, all vanished beneath a sea of gold and red. Nalia watched it all fade, her expression unreadable. "You could still go back one day," Joran said gently. "Try to lead again." She shook her head. "That world is over. My people don't need another ruler. They need someone who remembers what it means to care." Joran smiled. "And they're lucky to have you." For a long moment, they just stood there, watching the stars. Then a soft chime rang from the console. A message had arrived, one not from any of the rebel channels. Joran leaned forward and activated it. A hologram flickered into view, showing a distant signal. "Transmission detected," the ship system said. "Valeri Sanctuary Fleet located, estimated arrival in 14 days. Nalia's eyes widened. "That's impossible." Joran looked at her, eyebrows raised. "You think some of your people escaped?" She nodded slowly. "Not just escaped, survived, built something out there." He turned back to the screen. "Well then," he said with a grin, "looks like our story isn't over." She smiled too, something soft and real. "No, it's just beginning." The ship turned toward the stars, engines glowing as they left the ruined world behind. And for the first time in a long time, Nalia felt something new rising in her chest. Hope.